During the Ice Age, winter did not care whether a child was innocent, hungry, tired, or loved. Cold treated every small body the same. Yet children survived, not because they were strong, but because mothers learned to make weakness survivable. A mother could not defeat the snow. She could only protect one breath, one layer of warmth, one sleeping child, one more night. And perhaps the quietest truth is this: human survival may not have been built around the strongest hunters, but around the smallest lives that could not survive alone. So in a world where cold removed the weak first, how did mothers keep their children from becoming part of the winter? To understand how mothers protected their children during Ice Age winters, we first have to begin with the body of the child itself. Not with the snow, not with the cave, not with the fire, but with the small human body that had not yet learned how to carry its own survival. A child in the cold is not simply a smaller adult. A smaller body loses heat differently. It has less mass to hold warmth, more skin surface in relation to its size, and less stored energy to spend when the air begins to take heat away. In a warm season, this may not seem like the center of life. But in an Ice Age winter, when cold could enter through wet coverings, frozen ground, sharp wind, and long nights, this difference mattered quietly, hour after hour. An adult could walk to warm the muscles, gather wood, adjust a covering, move closer to the fire, or understand the first signs of numbness. A young child could not always do these things in time. A baby could do almost none of them. This is why the question of Ice Age motherhood is not only a question of love, it is also a question of heat, timing, and attention. A mother protecting a child in winter was protecting a body that cooled too quickly, tired too easily, and depended on someone else to notice danger before the danger became visible. We should be careful here. Archaeology does not preserve every night, every embrace, every small decision made beside a fire. It leaves us bones, tools, hearths, shelters, traces of clothing, and the wider evidence of people living through cold environments. But human biology gives us a firm starting point. Children, especially very young children, need help maintaining warmth. They need covering, dry places, food, sleep, and contact. In Ice Age conditions, these ordinary needs became survival needs. A mother did not need to understand modern physiology to know the truth of it. She could see it in a child's shivering, in stiff fingers, in crying that changed with hunger or cold, in the way a sleeping child had to be kept close when the night air dropped. The cold did not have to be dramatic to be dangerous. It only had to be patient. A child lying too far from shared warmth, wearing a damp hide, sleeping against frozen earth, or carried too long without protection from wind, could lose strength before anyone had a name for what was happening. This is why the weakest person in the group could quietly shape the behavior of the strongest. If a child could not keep pace, the group had to slow. If a child became wet, someone had to dry or replace the covering. If the fire was low, someone had to care before dawn. If a mother's body was exhausted, the child's protection weakened too. In this way, Ice Age winter turned childcare into a daily system of small defenses. The defense was not one object. It was not only a fur wrap, a cave wall, or a flame. It was the careful arrangement of all of them around a body that could not arrange them for itself. The child's size made everything closer. The fire had to be close enough, but not too close. The covering had to be warm enough, but not smothering. The sleeping place had to be dry enough, but still near other bodies. The mother's arms had to hold but also work. Her attention had to move between hunger, cold, fatigue, smoke, movement, and the child's breathing. When we imagine Ice Age survival, it is easy to picture hunters crossing snow or animals moving through frozen plains. But inside the human group, another kind of survival was happening in a much smaller space. A mother might have spent winter measuring the world through the needs of a child. Is the ground dry enough? Is the wind reaching the baby's face? Is the skin still warm? Is the child too quiet? Is there enough food for milk? Enough fuel for the night? Enough covering for the next crossing? These questions were not separate from Ice Age life. They were Ice Age life, seen from the place where survival was most delicate. Before we ask how mothers protected children with shelters, clothing, fire, or group care, we have to remember the first fact. Winter did not meet every human body equally. It pressed hardest on the small, the tired, the hungry, and the young. And because of that, protecting a child meant protecting warmth before almost anything else. In an Ice Age winter, cold was rarely only cold. It came with other forces that made a child's body more vulnerable: dampness, wind, hunger, tiredness, and the long hours when warmth had to be guarded without pause. A child did not need to be buried in snow to be in danger. It could be enough for the ground to be frozen, for the air to move through a loose covering, for melted snow to wet a hide, or for a child to fall asleep before enough warmth had returned to the hands and feet. This is why mothers could not protect children by thinking only about temperature. They had to protect the child from the whole winter condition. Dryness mattered because water takes heat from the body much faster than air. A fur or hide covering that was warm when dry could become dangerous if it stayed wet. A child carried through snow, mist, rain, or melting ice could lose warmth quietly if the outer layer became damp and the inner layer touched the skin. In a world without modern fabric, waterproof boots, sealed houses, or quick-drying clothes, keeping a child dry may have been one of the most important forms of protection. This does not mean we should imagine every Ice Age mother using the same clothing or the same method. Different groups lived in different regions, used different animals, and faced different seasons. But the basic problem was shared. A young body needed insulation, and insulation worked best when it stayed dry, thick, and close enough to trap warm air. Wind made the problem sharper. Wind does not simply feel cold, it removes the thin layer of warm air that gathers around the skin and under coverings. For a small child, that loss could matter quickly. A mother might turn her own body against the wind, hold a child under a wrap, place the child behind a rock, inside a shelter, near other bodies, or closer to a fire's protected side. These were not dramatic acts. They were small adjustments repeated so often that they may have become part of ordinary winter behavior. The child's face, fingers, feet, and breathing space had to be watched. Too much exposure was dangerous, but too much smoke, heat, or tight covering could also be harmful. Protection meant balance, and that balance had to be found in a world that kept changing. Hunger made winter even harder. Food was not only food, it was the fuel that allowed the body to produce heat. A hungry adult becomes weaker, colder, and slower. A hungry mother also had less strength for carrying, nursing, staying awake, gathering fuel, preparing hides, and responding to a child's needs. If the child was still nursing, the mother's energy mattered directly. If the child was older, it still needed soft food, shared food, and enough calories to keep warm through sleep and movement. In this way, Ice Age childcare was tied to hunting, gathering, storage, sharing, and travel. A child's warmth began long before the night fire. It began with whether the group had enough food, whether the mother had enough strength, and whether the day's movement had left everyone too tired to guard the night carefully. Long winter nights added another difficulty. During sleep, the body produces less heat, movement decreases, and danger can arrive quietly. A child who was warm at dusk might not remain warm until morning. The fire could fade, a covering could slip. The child could roll toward cold ground. A mother could fall into deep exhaustion after carrying, feeding, and walking through the day. This is why the danger of Ice Age winter was not always a sudden storm. Often, the greater threat was the slow wearing down of warmth. Wetness took a little, wind took a little, hunger took a little, fatigue took a little. By the time a child was visibly weak, the danger may already have been building for hours. To protect children in such winters, mothers had to notice what the cold was doing before it became obvious. They had to feel the air, judge the shelter, test the covering, share body heat, and read the child's small signals. The Ice Age did not ask one question at a time. It asked many quiet questions together. Is the child dry? Is the child fed? Is the child shielded from the wind? Is the child sleeping safely? Is the mother still strong enough to keep protecting? In that harsh season, survival was not only about enduring cold, it was about preventing cold from joining with wetness, hunger, and tiredness until a small body could no longer answer back. A mother in an Ice Age winter was never protecting a child in isolation. Even when the child was in her arms, the protection depended on many things outside her body. The fire someone had kept alive, the shelter someone had helped prepare, the food someone had brought back, the hides someone had scraped, dried, softened, or repaired, and the decision of the group to stop, move, wait, share, or leave. This is important because it keeps the story honest. We should not imagine one mother alone against the entire Ice Age, as if survival were only a private act of courage. Human beings survived cold environments partly because they lived in groups, and children made that group life even more necessary. A baby could not gather fuel. A small child could not judge the wind. A tired child could not walk all day through frozen ground. If a mother had to carry the child, she carried less of something else. If she had to nurse or feed the child, she needed food herself. If she had to sleep lightly to notice the child's warmth, someone else may have had to help guard the fire, prepare materials, or watch the surrounding camp. In this way, the child's weakness did not stay inside the mother's arms. It spread outward into the daily choices of the group. The group's pace may have changed because children cannot move like adults. A hunting band or foraging group might have known when a route was too exposed, when a stop had to come earlier, when a shelter needed more work, or when a mother carrying a child could not be treated like a free pair of hands. These are cautious inferences, not scenes we can prove for every Ice Age family, but they follow from a simple reality. Dependent children require time, energy, and protection. In a cold season, those needs become heavier. If a group ignored them, the youngest members would be the first to suffer. If the group adjusted, then children could survive long enough to grow, learn, remember paths, recognize foods, use tools, and later support the next generation. So the question of how mothers protected children is also a question of how early human groups made room for childhood. A child's survival required more than a warm wrap. It required a pattern of life that allowed warmth to be maintained. Someone had to think about where a child would sleep. Someone had to notice whether smoke filled the shelter. Someone had to keep the child away from sparks, frozen ground, sharp tools, and the edge of the fire. Someone had to decide whether a child was strong enough to travel or needed another day of rest. These decisions may have seemed ordinary at the time, but ordinary decisions are often what survival is made of. In Ice Age winters, motherhood may have been the center of attention, but not the whole structure. Grandmothers, older siblings, fathers, relatives, and other adults could all become part of the protective circle. In many human societies, childcare is not done by one person only, and it is reasonable to think that prehistoric children often benefited from shared care, especially when conditions were demanding. Still, the mother's role remained deeply physical. Her body could warm, feed, carry, shield, and calm. Her attention could read small changes before others noticed them, but if she was unsupported, her strength could be used up. This is why protecting the child also meant protecting the mother. A mother who was too hungry, too cold, too exhausted, or too isolated could not protect as well. The group that helped her was not only showing kindness, it was protecting its own future. Every child who survived winter carried more than one life forward. That child carried language, memory, learned roots, family bonds, and the possibility that the group would continue after the old had gone. This does not mean Ice Age people thought about survival in these modern words. They may have simply known, through daily experience, that a child needed warmth, that a mother needed help, and that winter punished carelessness quickly. The cold made dependence visible. It showed that no human body, especially no small one, survived alone. And perhaps this is the first answer hidden beneath the title. Mothers protected children by holding them close, but also by living inside a group that had to make the child's survival part of everyone's winter. When people hear the words Ice Age winter, they may imagine only deep snow, but for mothers protecting children, the greater danger was not always the snow itself. It was the whole climate around the child. Cold air, dry wind, frozen ground, short daylight, fewer easy foods, and nights that could feel longer than the strength of the body. The last ice age was not one single frozen world everywhere. Some regions were covered by great ice sheets. Other regions were open steppe, cold grassland, tundra, forest edge, or dry plain. Human groups lived in different places, and their winters were not all the same. But across many cold ice age environments, one truth remained important. Warmth was difficult to keep, and a child's body could not protect that warmth alone. A mother did not face winter as a picture of white snow. She faced it as air that moved through gaps, ground that stole heat through the feet and back, and dryness that cracked skin, stiffened materials, and made fuel precious. Cold, dry wind could be especially hard. It could sweep across open land where there were few trees to slow it down. It could enter shelters through small openings. It could turn a short walk into a careful effort. For a child, wind meant that even if the air temperature was not at its lowest, the body could still lose warmth quickly. The mother's work was not only to cover the child, but to place the child where the wind could not keep taking from the body. She might choose the side of a rock, a hollow, a cave entrance, a stand of trees, a skin wall, or the protected side of a fire. We cannot know each family's exact method, but we can understand the problem they were solving. The child had to be kept inside a pocket of calmer air. That pocket could be made by shelter, by clothing, by bodies close together, or by the careful position of the camp. The dry cold also changed the meaning of moisture. In winter, water was not simply something to drink. It was something that could become dangerous on the skin, in a covering, or in the ground beneath sleep. Snow could melt near a fire and then refreeze. Breath could dampen a wrap. Wet hides could grow heavy. A child carried close to an adult body could become warm, then sweat, then cool again if the covering was opened too suddenly. These are small details, but Ice Age survival was made of small details. Mothers had to think through the cold in layers. The outside layer faced wind and snow. The inside layer had to stay warm and dry. The child's skin had to remain protected, but the child also had to breathe freely and avoid too much smoke or overheating near flames. Long winter nights made everything more demanding. A short cold moment could be endured. A whole night required planning. If the fire faded before morning, the shelter had to hold enough warmth. If the child slept deeply, someone had to notice if the covering shifted. If the mother was exhausted, the group's help became more important. Darkness also limited movement. In daylight, adults could repair shelter, gather fuel, check traps or stored food, move camp, prepare skins, and observe weather. At night, choices narrowed. The mother and child were inside whatever protection had already been made. A poor sleeping place could not always be easily corrected after dark, especially in extreme weather. So winter protection began before the night arrived. It began in the choice of where to stop, what to dry, what to keep near the fire, how to arrange bedding, and how to place the child away from the coldest ground. This is why the Ice Age winter should be understood as a condition, not a single event. It was not only the storm that mattered. It was the repeated pressure of cold morning after cold morning, dry wind after dry wind, and nights where the smallest mistake could slowly take warmth away. For mothers, protecting children meant reading this condition before it became dangerous. The sky, the wind, the ground, the smell of damp hide, the child's hands, the child's breathing, the fire's strength, the mother's own hunger and tiredness. All of these belong to the same winter. And in that world, the first shelter was not only a place, it was the mother's ability and the group's ability to keep a child inside a small circle where the Ice Age could not reach all at once. One of the most dangerous things for a child in an ice age winter may have looked ordinary at first. A damp covering, cold skin, or sleep that lasted too long in the wrong place. These were not dramatic dangers. They did not arrive like a charging animal or a breaking storm. They worked quietly, by taking warmth away faster than the child could replace it. For a mother, this meant that protection was not only about finding warmth, it was about preventing warmth from escaping. A dry fur or hide could hold air close to the body and slow the loss of heat. But if that covering became wet from melted snow, rain, breath, sweat, or contact with damp ground, it could change from protection into risk. Water conducts heat away from the body far more effectively than dry air. A child wrapped in something damp could seem covered and still be losing warmth. This matters because prehistoric mothers did not have modern waterproof cloth, insulated boots, synthetic layers, or heated rooms where everything could be dried quickly. They worked with skin, fur, plant fibers, bark, grasses, sinew, bone tools, fire, smoke, sunlight when it appeared, and the knowledge gained by repeated winter experience. In that world, keeping a child dry was not a small household detail. It was part of souvenir the alfal. A mother may have had to check whether the child's inner layer stayed dry, whether the outer hide was taking snow, whether the bedding had absorbed ground moisture, or whether the child had grown too warm near the fire and then cooled again when moved away. The cold could enter through these changes. A baby pressed against an adult body might be warm while being carried, but if the covering trapped too much moisture, that warmth could become unstable. An older child playing near snow or sitting near the edge of a shelter might wet hands, feet, or knees without understanding the danger. Fingers and toes are especially exposed because they are small, far from the body's center, and easy for cold to reach. A mother watching a child in winter was not only watching behavior, she was watching the edges of the body, the places where warmth disappeared first. Cold skin created another problem. When a child's skin became chilled, the body had to spend energy to restore warmth. If the child was hungry, tired, or already weak, that recovery became harder. A mother might respond by pulling the child close, changing the position near the fire, adding dry material, rubbing cold hands gently, or tucking feet beneath warmer coverings. We cannot prove each gesture from archaeology, but the biological need is clear. The child had to be warmed before cold became deep. Waiting too long could make the child quieter, slower, and less able to respond. For sleep audio, this truth should be told softly, but it should not be softened into something false. Sleep itself was also a risk. Sleep is necessary, but in winter, it removes many defenses. A sleeping child does not adjust coverings well. A baby cannot move away from cold ground. A tired child may not wake when a wrap slips or when the fire becomes low. During sleep, movement decreases, and the body's heat must be protected by the environment around it. This is why the place where a child slept mattered so much. The ground had to be insulated with hides, grasses, branches, or other available material. The child had to be near warmth, but not in smoke or sparks. The covering had to stay close, but not block breathing. Other bodies nearby could help keep the air warmer. A mother might sleep lightly, waking to touch the child, adjust a wrap, feed, soothe, or pull the child back from the cold edge of the bedding. None of this looks heroic from far away. It looks like ordinary care. But in an ice age winter, ordinary care was the wall between life and loss. Dampness, cold skin, and cold sleep were dangerous because they made the child's weakness continuous. They turned every hour into a small test. The mother's task was to interrupt that test again and again. Dry the covering, warm the hands, shift the sleeping place, guard the fire, keep the child close, and notice the signs before winter became stronger than the body. For a mother in an ice age winter, the danger was not only the day when the snow fell hard or the wind became sharp enough to stop travel. The deeper danger was the slow loss of heat across ordinary hours. A child could survive one cold moment if warmth returned quickly, but winter did not always attack in one moment. It could take a little warmth while the group walked, a little more while the child waited near the edge of a shelter, more during sleep, more when food was scarce, and more again when a covering became damp or loose. This is why protecting children during Ice Age winters had to be continuous. It was not one decision. It was a rhythm of watching, adjusting, warming, drying, feeding, carrying, and resting. A mother had to protect the child before the child looked endangered. By the time a young child became too quiet, too weak, or too cold to respond normally, the body might already have spent more energy than it could easily replace. So the mother's attention had to live ahead of the crisis. She had to notice the wind before it reached the child too long. She had to notice wetness before it reached the skin. She had to notice hunger before the child's body lost the fuel needed for warmth. She had to notice her own tiredness too, because her strength was part of the child's shelter. In this sense, Ice Age motherhood was not only care after danger appeared, it was prevention, repeated so often that it may have seemed like ordinary life. The child's position near the fire might need to change as smoke shifted. The bedding might need more insulation from the frozen ground. The child's feet might need to be tucked in again. A hide might need to be turned, dried, or shaken free of snow. A baby might need to be held closer under a shared covering, not because anything dramatic had happened, but because the night was long and the warmth was slowly thinning. The most important protection may have been this ability to treat small changes as meaningful. Modern people often imagine survival as a set of big tools, a cave, a flame, a spear, a fur coat. But for a child in winter, the difference between safety and danger could be smaller than that. It could be the thickness of bedding under the back. It could be whether the child slept between adults or near the cold edge. It could be whether a mother kept the child's face out of wind while still allowing easy breathing. It could be whether the group stopped early enough to make a dry sleeping place before darkness. These details belong directly to the question of how mothers protected their children, because a child's body forced care to become precise. Ice Age, winter, punished gaps. A small gap in clothing let wind enter. A gap between the child and the mother's body let warmth escape. A gap in attention allowed dampness or cold ground to work for too long. Mothers may not have spoken about these gaps in scientific language, but they would have known the results through touch, sound, and experience. A warm child felt different from a cold one. A hungry cry sounded different from a sleepy one. A child who curled inward, stopped moving, or became unusually still would have drawn attention. Protection lived in that close reading of the body. It also lived in planning beyond the body. Fuel had to be gathered before the night needed it. Materials had to be repaired before a covering failed. Food had to be shared before weakness became too deep. Travel had to be judged with the slowest and smallest people in mind. This is why winter protection was not only a mother's instinct, it was a whole pattern of timing. The mother guarded the child in the present, but she also depended on preparations made earlier in the day, earlier in the season, and sometimes earlier in the life of the group. Knowledge of good shelters, animal skins, dry grasses, safe fire placement, and protected routes could all matter. The Ice Age winter did not ask only whether people were brave. It asked whether they could keep warmth from leaking away hour after hour. For children, this was the central struggle. They were not saved once. They were saved repeatedly, in quiet ways, through the long patience of care. Before a child had a stitched garment, before a sleeping place was arranged, before a shelter could block the wind completely, there was one protection that followed the child wherever the mother went: human warmth. In an Ice Age winter, the mother's body may have been the first and most reliable shelter a baby knew. This does not mean her body was stronger than the cold. It means her closeness could slow the child's loss of heat at the moment when cold was trying to take it away. A very young child could not build warmth by choice. It could not move closer to the fire with judgment, wrap itself properly, or understand why wind on wet skin mattered. But it could be held. It could be pressed against a warmer body. It could sleep under a shared covering. It could be carried in a position where the mother's skin, clothing, breath, and movement created a small zone of protection. In cold environments, Contact is not only emotional, it is practical. Bodies close together reduce exposed surface, share warmth, and help keep a small person within a more stable temperature space. For mothers in Ice Age winters, this closeness may have been one of the simplest and oldest technologies of childcare. It required no metal, no written knowledge, and no permanent building. It required attention, endurance, and the repeated decision not to let the child drift too far from warmth. When we imagine this, we should stay grounded. We cannot claim to know the exact way every Paleolithic mother held her child, or whether every group used the same kind of sling, wrap, fur cradle, or carrying method. Materials such as hides, plant fibers, and cords often decay, so the archaeological record is incomplete, but the need itself is not uncertain. A baby in winter needs warmth, feeding, safe sleep, and protection from exposure. Close carrying and shared body heat are reasonable human solutions to that need. A mother might have carried a baby under an outer skin, against her chest or side, where the child could feel heat without being directly exposed to wind. She might have adjusted the covering so the child could breathe freely while still being shielded. She might have turned away from blowing snow, bent her shoulders around the child, or sat with other people near the fire so that warmth came from several directions. These are not grand scenes. They are small, almost invisible arrangements. Yet for a baby, they could be the difference between warmth that lasted and warmth that vanished. Holding a child close also made it easier to notice change. A mother could feel if the child's skin cooled, if breathing changed, if the child became restless, limp, hungry, or too quiet. In winter, this kind of sensing mattered, because danger did not always announce itself loudly. A child who was losing warmth might first become less active. A baby might cry, then grow weak, then grow still. Close contact allowed the mother to read the child through touch before the problem became obvious from a distance. This is why the body was not only a heater, it was also a warning system. The mother's hands, arms, chest, and sleep became part of the child's protection. At night, shared warmth may have mattered even more. Fire gave heat, but fire also changed. It rose, faded, smoked, sparked, and depended on fuel. A body beside a child remained a steadier source of warmth, especially when several people slept close together under hides or near insulated bedding. A child placed alone near a fire could still be vulnerable to cold ground, shifting smoke, or a slipped covering. A child close to the mother could be adjusted again and again through the night. This does not make Ice Age motherhood gentle in a simple way. It makes it demanding. To be another person's shelter is exhausting. The mother had to stay warm enough herself, fed enough herself, and rested enough to keep giving warmth. If she was chilled, starving, or depleted, the child's protection weakened. So the warmth between mother and child was never separate from food, shelter, fire, and group support. Still, at the center of it all was a very old fact. Before humans could build perfect walls against winter, they could gather bodies together. And for the smallest children, the first wall against the Ice Age may have been the curve of a mother's arms, holding one fragile life close enough that the cold could not take it all at once. If fire was the warmth people could build, the mother's body was the warmth a child could carry. For a baby or very young child in an Ice Age winter, this living warmth may have mattered before any shelter was fully prepared. A fire could be made only where fuel existed, where sparks could be protected, where wind could be controlled, and where the group had time to stop. A shelter could take effort to repair, cover, clear, or arrange. But a mother's body moved with the child. It could bend around the child when the wind changed. It could close a gap in the covering. It could warm cold hands, shield the face, and keep the child close while the group walked, waited, rested, or slept. This does not mean the mother was a perfect answer to winter. Her body was not endless. She had to spend her own energy to create heat. She had to eat, rest, and stay dry. But in the narrow space between danger and safety, her warmth could give the child time. Time for the fire to grow, time for the shelter to be arranged. time for damp material to be replaced, time for food to be shared. In this way, the mother's body worked almost like a living layer between the child and the ice age. It did not remove winter. It slowed winter down. That is an important difference. In fact, the cold was still outside the skin wrap, still under the bedding, still in the air beyond the fire, but the child was not meeting it directly. The child was meeting the mother first. Her warmth softened the first contact with the cold world. Her arms made the child's surface smaller to the wind. Her clothing and covering trapped air around two bodies instead of one. Her breathing, movement, and touch helped the child remain inside a warmer rhythm. This kind of protection is easy to underestimate because it leaves almost no archaeological mark. A stone tool can remain for thousands of years. A hearth can leave charcoal. A bone needle can show that people had ways to sew skins and make fitted coverings. But an arm around a baby leaves no direct trace. A mother waking in the night to pull a child closer leaves no object behind. A child sleeping against an adult body becomes invisible to history unless we remember that human survival is not made only of things that fossilize. Still, we must stay careful. We should not invent a single fixed picture and call it fact. Ice Age mothers lived in many landscapes, across many thousands of years, and their methods would not have been identical. Some may have used soft hides, some woven or twisted fibers, some fur bedding, some cradle-like arrangements, some carrying positions that kept a child close while leaving the hands partly free. What we can say more safely is that the need for body warmth was real, and close contact was one of the most direct answers available. For a nursing child, closeness also linked warmth with food. Feeding was not only comfort, it brought energy, calm, and contact together. A hungry child had less strength to produce heat. A cold child might struggle to feed well. A mother who could hold, warm, and feed at once was solving several winter problems in the same small space. Yet this made her own condition even more important. If she was underfed, chilled, or exhausted, she had less warmth to give and less strength to remain alert. The mother as a living fire depended on the group around her. Someone had to keep fuel available. Someone had to help prepare skins. Someone had to share food. Someone had to help make a sleeping place where her body heat was not wasted into frozen ground. This is why the image of the mother alone is incomplete. Her body could be the closest shelter, but the group helped keep that shelter alive. In a hard winter, a child might have survived because warmth came in layers. First the mother's skin and breath, then a dry covering, then another body nearby, then insulated bedding, then fire, then shelter, then the wider group choosing not to let the smallest member face winter alone. The mother's body was at the center of that circle, but it was not separated from it. She was not defeating the Ice Age by strength. She was turning warmth into a repeated act, one held breath, one careful covering, one close night at a time. The most important acts of Ice Age childcare may be the hardest ones to see from the present. A stone blade can survive in the ground. A hearth can leave ash and charcoal. A bone needle can remain long after the hands that used it are gone. But the closeness between a mother and a child usually leaves no clear object behind. An arm wrapped around a baby does not fossilize. A night of light sleep beside a child does not remain as a tool. A mother turning her body against the wind, moving a child closer to warmth, or waking because the child's breathing changed is almost invisible to archaeology. Yet these invisible actions may have carried enormous weight. This is why we have to be careful and honest at the same time. We cannot pretend to know every private moment of Ice Age family life. We cannot say exactly how every mother slept, how often she woke, or how each group arranged children beside the fire. But we also should not ignore the kind of care that biology makes necessary, simply because it does not leave a strong material trace. A young child in winter needed warmth, food, dry covering, safe sleep, and protection from wind and ground cold. Those needs did not wait for permanent houses or written knowledge. They had to be answered by bodies, materials, habits, and attention. The quiet closeness between mother and child belongs to that answer. It may have looked ordinary to the people living it. A baby held under a hide, a child tucked between adults, a mother checking small hands in the dark, a sleeping place made softer with skins, grass, or branches, a covering pulled back from the face so the child could breathe. These gestures are small, but in an Ice Age winter, small gestures repeated through the night could become survival. The difficulty is that modern imagination often wants visible proof. It wants a preserved cradle, a clear baby wrap, a marked sleeping space, or a picture on a cave wall that tells the whole story. Sometimes archaeology does give hints of childhood. Small footprints, child burials, ornaments, tools, and traces of shelters or hearths. It also gives evidence that Paleolithic people made clothing, used fire, processed hides, and lived in groups. But the daily protection of children is often hidden between those objects. We have to connect the evidence with caution. If there were sewn coverings, they could help protect bodies from cold. If there were hearths, they created heat and light. If there were shelters, they reduced wind and exposure. If there were children, someone had to keep them alive through conditions they could not manage alone. This does not prove one exact scene, but it supports a careful picture. Childcare was not separate from Ice Age survival. It was built into it. The mother's closeness was especially important because it allowed constant adjustment. A shelter is useful, but it cannot feel a child's cold skin. A fire is powerful, but it cannot know when a child is too close to smoke or too far from warmth. A fur covering can insulate, but it cannot pull itself back into place after slipping. The mother's body and attention filled these gaps. She could feel, listen, shift, warm, feed, and calm. She could respond before a problem became large. In this way, closeness was not only affection, it was a living form of control in a world where many things could not be controlled. It turned protection into something flexible. If the wind changed, the mother could turn. If the child grew restless, she could adjust. If the night grew colder, she could pull the child nearer. If the fire smoked, she could move the child's face away. These actions are difficult to prove in detail, but they make sense because they answer specific winter problems faced by small children, and that is the key to keeping the story truthful. We do not need to invent dramatic legends about Ice Age mothers. The real picture is already powerful enough. A mother protecting a child through winter may have spent much of her strength on things almost too quiet for history to notice. Staying close, staying awake enough, keeping a covering dry, sharing warmth, and noticing the child before the cold did. The deepest human survival may have happened not only where tools were made or animals were hunted, but where a sleeping child was kept warm through one more long night. When we ask how mothers protected their children during Ice Age winters, we have to remember that many of the most important materials were also the easiest to lose from history. Stone survives, bone can survive, charcoal can survive, but the soft things that may have kept a child alive often disappear. Animal skins, fur, sinew, plant fibers, grasses, bark, wooden frames, soft bedding, carrying straps, and coverings used close to the body. This creates a quiet problem for anyone telling the story honestly. The absence of a preserved baby wrap does not mean no child was wrapped. The absence of every winter garment does not mean people stood in the cold with only simple draped hides. Organic materials decay, burn, rot, get reused, or vanish in soil conditions that do not preserve them. So the Ice Age record is not a full inventory of daily life. It is a damaged memory, with many of the warmest parts missing. For mothers, those missing materials matter deeply. A child could not be protected by stone tools alone. Stone could cut, scrape, pierce, and shape. Bone needles or awls could help make holes or stitches. Scrapers could help prepare hides. But the actual warmth came from softer things. Fur that trapped air, hides that blocked wind, dry grasses that lifted a body from frozen ground, fibers that tied or fastened layers, and bedding that kept the child from touching cold earth directly. A mother protecting a child in winter may have depended on these materials every day. even though many of them would leave little or no trace for archaeologists to find thousands of years later. This is why the story of Ice Age childcare must be built from both evidence and caution. We know Paleolithic people used animal materials, made tools, controlled fire, and adapted to cold regions. We also know that clothing and coverings become especially important when humans live in harsh climates. But when we speak about a mother wrapping a child in fur, placing dry material beneath the child, or using a hide as a windbreak, we should use careful language. These were likely and practical solutions, not a single scene proven for every group. Different Ice Age communities lived in different environments. Some had access to reindeer, mammoth, horse, bison, hare, or other animals depending on place and time. Some landscapes had more wood, some more open steppe, some more caves or rock shelters, some fewer protected places. The materials available to a mother were shaped by the land around her. In one region, thick fur might have been central. In another, layered hides, grasses, bark, or woven plant fibers may have mattered more. The common problem was not identical material. The common problem was heat loss. A child needed a barrier between skin and wind, between body and ground, between warm breath and freezing air. Animal hide was valuable because it could hold warmth in several ways. Fur could trap still air close to the body. A hide without fur could serve as a wrap, cover, wall, floor layer, or shield from wind. Several layers could be arranged, so the outer layer took snow or wind, while the inner layer stayed drier and warmer. For a child, this layering may have been more important than for an adult, because the child's body had less reserve. A mother might have cared less about whether a covering looked finished, and more about whether it stayed dry, stayed close, and did not expose the child's neck, hands, feet, or sleeping side. But hides were not magic. They had to be cleaned, dried, softened, repaired, and protected from moisture. Wet hide could become heavy and cold. Frozen hide could become stiff. Smoke might help dry or preserve materials, but smoke could also irritate breathing. A covering that was too loose could let wind in. A covering too tight could make feeding, breathing, or movement difficult. So the material itself was only part of protection. The mother's judgment turned material into safety. She had to know when to add a layer, when to loosen it, when to dry it, when to use it as bedding instead of clothing, when to put the child under her own outer covering, and when to let the fire do more work. The lost world of Ice Age softness is important because it reminds us that survival was not only made of hard tools, it was made of prepared skins, dry bedding, repaired edges, tied corners, careful folds, and the daily labour of keeping a small body separated from cold air and frozen ground. Much of that labour has vanished, but the need it answered has not vanished at all. A loose hide can protect, but in deep cold, looseness can also become a weakness. Wind enters through openings. Warm air escapes from the neck, sleeves, waist, or the lower edge of a wrap. A child who moves, sleeps, curls, cries, or is carried for a long time can shift a covering out of place without meaning to. This is why sewing may have mattered so much in cold Ice Age environments. A sewn covering can fit closer to the body. It can hold its shape better than a simple draped skin. It can close gaps, join smaller pieces of hide, repair tears, attach ties, and help make layers that stay where they are needed. Archaeologists have found bone needles and other tools from Upper Paleolithic contexts, and these objects suggest that at least some Ice Age peoples had the skill to make more fitted clothing from animal skins. We should not turn this into a single universal picture. Not every group, in every region, at every time, used the same clothing. But the logic is clear. In cold places, fitted coverings could reduce heat loss, and for children that could be especially important. A mother protecting a child would not only need warmth, she would need warmth that stayed in place. A baby held under a large fur might be warm while the mother sat still, but movement changes everything. If the group had to walk, gather fuel, shift camp, or escape wind, the covering had to stay close. If the child slept, the covering had to remain over the small body even as the child turned or the mother moved. A sewn hood, sleeve, pouch-like wrap, tied edge, or close layer could keep warm air trapped around the child more reliably than an open skin. We cannot say exactly what each garment looked like, but we can understand the purpose: to create a smaller, steadier space of warmth around a body that lost heat quickly. Bone needles also tell us something important about labor. Warm clothing did not appear by itself. Someone had to prepare hides, scrape them, soften them, pierce them, cut them, join them, and repair them. That work took time, skill, and patience. For a mother, or for anyone helping her, clothing for a child may have required special attention because children grow, move unpredictably, and cannot always keep their own coverings arranged. A child's clothing had to protect without making feeding, carrying, breathing, or movement impossible. The covering had to keep the chest warm, protect the back, shield the head, cover the feet, and still allow the child to be held close. If the child was very young, the mother's own outer layer may have worked together with the child's covering, making two bodies share one protected space. In that arrangement, sewing was not just a craft. It was a way of controlling air. The goal was not to make something beautiful first, though Ice Age clothing may also have carried identity and meaning. The first winter problem was simpler: keep the wind out, keep dry warmth in, and stop the small body from meeting the cold directly. Layering made this more effective. One layer could be soft and close, another could block wind, another could be used as bedding. A mother might adjust these layers through the day: tighter while traveling, looser near the fire, thicker during sleep, drier after snow, more open when the child needed to feed or breathe freely. This kind of care required knowledge of material as much as knowledge of the child. A hide with fur inward feels different from a hide with fur outward. A stiff frozen edge behaves differently from a softened one. A damp seam can become a cold line against the body. A torn fastening can open a path for wind. In winter, these details were not decorative. They were part of the child's survival. It is easy to imagine Ice Age protection as a rough animal skin thrown over the shoulders, but the presence of sewing tools asks us to imagine something more careful in at least some places. People making coverings that could be shaped, repaired, layered, and fitted. For mothers, this could mean a child was not merely covered, but enclosed in a small human-made climate. The child still needed the mother's warmth, the fire's heat, dry bedding, food, and shelter. But sewn clothing and close layers could slow the loss of warmth between all those other protections. They gave the mother more time. Time before the child cooled. Time before wind reached the skin. Time before sleep became dangerous. In an Ice Age winter, that time may have been one of the most precious gifts a covering could give. In an Ice Age winter, a mother may have had to think about warmth in an order that was not comfortable for her. The child's body came first because the child had fewer ways to answer the cold. An adult could feel discomfort and choose a response more quickly. She could tighten a covering, stand, move, turn toward the fire, rub her hands, stamp her feet, or decide that a sleeping place was too exposed. A baby could not make those decisions. A young child might notice cold only after warmth had already begun to leave the body. This meant that a mother's comfort and a child's survival were not always the same thing. She might give the warmer side of her fur to the child, hold the child inside her own outer layer, sleep in a position that shielded the child from wind, or keep herself partly awake so the child stayed covered. These are cautious possibilities, not exact scenes preserved in the ground. But they follow from the real imbalance between an adult body and a small child's body in winter. The mother had judgment. The child had need. That difference shaped care. A mother might have chosen where the child's head rested, where the feet were tucked, which part of the covering stayed dry, and how close the child could be to the fire without smoke, sparks, or overheating. She might have felt cold along her own back while turning the child toward warmth. She might have kept the child under a shared hide while her arms remained exposed for work. She might have carried extra weight because the child's covering, bedding, or dry layer mattered more than something easier to leave behind. In a mild climate, these choices might be ordinary inconveniences. In an Ice Age winter, they could become serious costs. Warmth was limited, dry material was limited, food was limited, energy was limited. Every layer placed around the child had to come from somewhere, from an animal hunted, a hide prepared, fibers twisted, fuel gathered, or labor spent. Protecting a child was therefore never separate from the larger economy of survival. A mother could not simply decide to keep a child warm if there was no dry covering, no food for her body, no fuel for the night, and no group support. But when those resources existed, even in small amounts, the child's need may have guided how they were used. The smallest body required the most careful arrangement. The child might need the inner dry layer because the child cooled quickly. The mother might accept a colder outer position because she could endure and respond. The child might be placed between warmer bodies because it could not generate enough warmth alone. The mother might keep checking a seam, a fold, or a foot covering because a gap that annoyed an adult could endanger a child. This is where Ice Age motherhood becomes both tender and practical. It was not sentiment alone. It was the management of scarce heat. The mother's love, if we use that word, had to pass through material problems. Wet fur, stiff hide, smoky fire, frozen ground, tired arms, and a hungry body. Care became physical work. It became the knowledge that the child's warmth depended on layers staying close, on skin staying dry, on sleep being guarded, on the mother having enough strength to keep noticing. Yet this does not mean the mother always sacrificed alone. A group that understood winter would also understand that a mother protecting a child needed protection herself. If she gave too much warmth and food away, she weakened. If she slept too little, her attention failed. If she carried too much, she could not travel safely. So the child's protection had to include the mother's survival. This balance may be one of the quietest truths of Ice Age life. The child needed the mother, but the mother needed a circle around her. Shared food, repaired coverings, safe fire, dry bedding, and other hands when her own body could not do everything. The child came first in many small decisions because the child was most vulnerable, but the mother could not disappear inside that duty. She had to remain warm enough to warm, fed enough to feed, awake enough to notice, and strong enough to carry. In this way, protecting children during Ice Age winters was not simply giving them the best covering. It was arranging a fragile chain of care so that warmth passed from animal skin to mother, from fire to shelter, from group to mother, and from mother to child. If one link failed, the child felt it first. And that may be why the needs of children could quietly shape the choices of everyone around them. Fire was one of the most important protections humans had in cold Ice Age environments. But for a mother with a child, fire was not simply a bright place in the dark. It was a small zone where the rules of winter changed for a while. Outside that zone, wind could move freely, ground could remain frozen, and the air could take heat from skin and clothing. Inside it, a child could be warmed, food could be softened, hides could be dried, tools could be repaired, and people could gather close enough for shared protection. A fire did not remove the Ice Age. It made a temporary island inside it. For a child, that island mattered because warmth had to be steady, not only sudden. A baby or young child could not sit beside flames with the judgment of an adult. It could not understand sparks, smoke, heat, or the danger of crawling too close. So the mother's task was more complex than placing the child near warmth. She had to place the child in the right relationship to warmth. Too far away, and the cold continued its slow work. Too close, and smoke, burns, or overheating could become dangerous. This balance may have shaped the whole arrangement of a winter camp. The fire had to be useful for the child, but not threatening to the child. It had to warm the air, dry coverings, and help the group endure the night, while still being controlled by adults who understood its risks. In this sense, fire was not only a tool, it was a managed space. Around it, people could create layers of safety, a dry place to sit, a warmer side for a child, a place where damp hides could hang or lie near enough to dry. a sleeping area close enough to benefit from heat, but not so close that sparks reached it. A mother might use the fire to warm her own body before holding a child, to dry a covering before wrapping the child again, to soften food for an older child, or to keep water, meat, roots, or stored foods more usable in the cold. We should be careful not to describe every Ice Age group as if they had the same camp or the same hearth. The archaeological record shows hearths in many prehistoric contexts, but it does not preserve every family arrangement. Still, the practical link between fire and childcare is strong. A child's warmth depended not only on clothing and body contact, but on the environment around those things. A dry hide works better than a wet one. A warm sleeping place is safer than frozen ground. A fed child has more energy than a hungry one. Fire helped with all of these. It turned raw cold into manageable cold. It gave mothers and other adults a place to bring a child back from exposure before the child's body weakened too far. It also created social closeness. People gathered around fire not only because it was warm, but because warmth was easier to share when bodies were near one another. A mother with a child could sit where other adults noticed smoke, wind, fuel, and movement. Older children could be watched more easily in the light. A tired mother might receive help more naturally when the group was gathered in the same warm circle. The fire made care visible. If a child cried, shivered, coughed from smoke, or shifted under a covering, someone nearby could notice. If the mother needed to adjust bedding or feed the child, the light helped her hands. In deep winter, even simple visibility mattered. Darkness makes small problems harder to see. Fire gave enough light for repair, enough heat for drying, and enough gathering space for shared attention. But fire also required work. It had to be fed. Fuel had to be gathered, carried, dried, stored, and protected. In some cold open landscapes, wood may not have been easy to find everywhere, so people would have had to plan carefully. A fire that warmed a child at night began with decisions made earlier in the day. Where should the group stop? Is there fuel nearby? Can the fire be sheltered from wind? Can smoke leave without freezing the sleeping space? Can the child be kept warm while adults gather what the night will need? These questions show why fire was not separate from motherhood. It became part of the mother's protective system, even when others tended it. The child's survival depended on the flame, but also on the hands that kept the flame useful. For Ice Age children, fire was not only heat. It was the center of a temporary world where mothers could dry, feed, watch, warm, and keep winter from entering all at once. For a child in an Ice Age winter, fire could save warmth, but it also had to be respected. The same flame that dried a hide and softened food could burn skin, fill a shelter with smoke, throw sparks into bedding, or make a sleeping child too warm on one side and too cold on the other. This is why a mother's protection near fire was not simply closeness. It was placement. A child needed to be close enough to benefit from heat, but far enough to remain safe. That balance may sound simple, yet in a winter shelter it could change many times during one night. Flames rise and fall. Smoke shifts when wind changes. A covering dries, then becomes too hot. A child turns in sleep. Fuel collapses inward. Ash moves. Sparks jump. The mother, or another adult nearby, had to keep reading the fire as carefully as the cold. If the child was placed too far from the hearth, the fire became only a distant light while ground cold continued to climb through bedding. If the child was placed too close, danger came from heat itself. A baby could not understand why a bright flame should not be touched. A young child might move toward warmth without judging the risk. Even a sleeping child could roll toward a hotter place or breathe smoke if the air inside the shelter changed. So the mother's task was to create a safe distance, a kind of invisible border between warmth and harm. That border might be made by the position of her own body, by stones around a hearth, by bedding placed at a careful angle, by another adult sitting nearby, or by arranging the child behind the mother's legs, arms, or covering. We cannot know every method, but the problem is clear. Fire had to be made useful without letting it become another danger to the smallest person in the group. Smoke was one of the most delicate problems. In a cold shelter, smoke could help keep insects away, dry materials, and preserve some things. But too much smoke near a child's face would be harmful and distressing. A mother had to protect breathing as well as warmth. If the wind pushed smoke downward, if the shelter opening changed the draft, or if damp fuel smoked heavily, the child's position might need to shift. A child coughing or turning away from smoke would tell adults that the warm place was not fully safe. This is part of why shelter design, fire placement, and childcare belong together. A good winter place was not only warm, it allowed heat to stay while smoke could leave. It gave mothers enough room to hold, feed, and watch children without placing them in the path of sparks. It gave bedding a safer edge, where the child could sleep near warmth but not inside the fire's reach. Overheating also mattered, especially for a baby wrapped in layers near a hearth. A child protected from cold could become too hot if the covering trapped heat too well. Then sweat or dampness could appear, and if the child was later moved away from the fire, that moisture could turn into cold. This shows again that protection was not one fixed state. The mother had to adjust, open a covering, move the child slightly back, change the angle, dry the damp layer, or hold the child close while letting excess heat escape. The goal was steady warmth, not the strongest heat. In Ice Age winter, steadiness may have been more valuable than intensity. A roaring fire that smoked, sparked, and died quickly was less useful for a child than a controlled fire that could last, warm and dry, without threatening sleep. Around such a fire, mothers could create a careful arrangement, the child wrapped but breathing freely, bedding raised from the ground, a dry layer ready if moisture appeared, adults close enough to notice change, and fuel kept within reach for the long night. This quiet management of distance may have been one of the most important skills of winter childcare. The child had to live near fire, but not surrender to it. The mother had to use heat without trusting it blindly. She had to understand that survival was held in a narrow space, not too cold, not too hot, not too smoky, not too exposed. In that narrow space, the child could sleep while winter pressed outside the shelter and fire moved like a living thing beside the family. Keeping a fire alive through the night may have been one of the quietest forms of protecting children during Ice Age winters. A flame at sunset was not enough. A warm evening did not guarantee a warm dawn. The hard hours often came later, when people were tired, when the air grew colder, when fuel burned down, and when a sleeping child could not adjust to the slow change around the hearth. For a mother, or for the group around her, fire had to be treated almost like another living thing in the camp. It had to be fed before it became weak. It had to be sheltered from wind. It had to be kept from spreading into bedding. It had to be watched when smoke changed direction. It had to last long enough for the child's body to remain inside a stable circle of warmth. This was not only a technical task, it was childcare. A child who slept beside a fading fire might not wake soon enough to pull a covering closer. A baby held near a mother might still depend on the warmth of the surrounding air, the dry bedding beneath them, and the outer hide that had been warmed and dried by the hearth. If the fire went out completely, the shelter did not become dangerous in one instant, but warmth began to retreat. The ground grew more powerful. Dampness returned. Breath cooled. A hide that had felt comfortable near the flame might no longer be enough. The mother's body could still warm the child, but now she had to spend more of her own energy, and her own tiredness became more dangerous. This is why keeping embers alive could matter as much as building a bright flame. A small bed of coals, protected under ash or fed slowly with fuel, could preserve the possibility of morning heat. It could make restarting the fire easier before the coldest part of dawn. It could allow coverings to be warmed again, food to be softened again, and the child to be moved from sleep into daylight without passing through too much cold. We should not imagine every Ice Age group tending fire in exactly the same way. Fuel, climate, shelter form, and season would all change the method, but the principle remains clear. Fire was not useful only when it was dramatic. It was useful when it endured. For mothers, Endurance was the point. The child needed warmth not only when adults were awake and active, but when the whole group was most vulnerable, asleep, hungry, and still. Someone may have risen to add fuel. Someone may have shifted a log or moved embers. Someone may have checked whether sparks threatened bedding. Someone may have noticed that the mother and child had moved too far from the heat as the fire lowered. These small acts are easy to overlook because they do not look like great survival scenes, yet they belong directly to the question of how children were protected. A winter night could not be passed by courage alone. It had to be organized. Fuel gathered before dark was a promise made to the sleeping child. Dry wood, bone, dung, brush, or other available fuel, depending on the region, had to be considered before the night demanded it. The best place for the fire had to be chosen before everyone lay down. The child's bedding had to be arranged with the fire's changes in mind. The mother had to know that the flame would not stay the same, and her care had to move with it. Fire also gave rhythm to the night. When it brightened, people could dry and adjust. When it lowered, bodies drew closer. When embers remained, the group could hold warmth without always feeding a large flame. Around this rhythm, a mother could protect a child through slow intervals rather than sudden rescue. The fire did not replace her arms. It supported them. It did not replace dry coverings. It helped maintain them. It did not replace food. It helped make food usable. It did not replace the group. It gave the group a center around which care could be shared. By morning, if the child was still warm, if the covering was still dry enough, if the mother still had strength, and if embers still held a little red life under ash, then the night's protection had succeeded in the most ordinary way. Nothing spectacular had happened. The child had simply continued breathing inside a human-made circle of heat. In an Ice Age winter, that quiet continuation may have been one of the greatest achievements of all. A winter shelter in the Ice Age was not always a house in the modern sense. It did not need straight walls, a door, or a permanent roof to matter. For a mother protecting a child, a shelter was any place where winter became less direct. A cave, a rock overhang, a hollow behind a ridge, a low place protected from wind, a line of trees, a snowbank used as a barrier, or a structure made with hides, branches, bones, and other available materials could all change the child's chances. The purpose was simple but serious. Reduce wind, keep the sleeping place drier, hold some warmth near the body, and give the mother enough control to care for the child through the night. In Ice Age conditions, shelter did not have to be perfect to be valuable. Even a small reduction in wind could help a covering work better. Even a dry layer between the child and the ground could slow the loss of heat. Even a protected corner near a fire could give a mother a place to feed, hold, dry, and watch a child, without the whole force of the cold pressing in. Caves are often remembered because they preserve evidence well, but not all Ice Age people lived deep inside caves, and not all regions had useful caves. Some caves were damp, smoky, crowded, dangerous, or far from food and fuel. A cave entrance or rock shelter could offer protection from wind and precipitation, yet the ground might still be cold, and smoke still had to escape. A mother with a child would not only need a roof of stone above her, she would need a place where the child could sleep safely, breathe well, stay off wet ground, and remain close enough to warmth. This is why shelter was not just location, it was arrangement. A rock wall might block one direction of wind, while hides or branches blocked another. A hearth might be placed where heat could be useful without filling the sleeping space with smoke. Bedding might be laid over grass, branches, skins, or other insulating materials, so the child did not lie directly on frozen earth. The child's place had to be chosen inside the shelter, not merely inside the landscape. In open environments, people may have used temporary structures made from materials around them. Archaeological evidence from the Paleolithic includes traces of huts, hearths, post holes, stone arrangements, and large bones used in some regions, but we should avoid imagining one universal Ice Age home. A mammoth bone structure in one place does not describe every family elsewhere. A hide-covered frame in one region does not prove the same design everywhere. What we can say more safely is that people in cold landscapes had to create protected spaces, and mothers with children had special reasons to value those spaces. A child could not endure wind the way a moving adult could. A baby could not choose the warmer side of a shelter. A young child could not always understand why an opening in the wall mattered, so the mother's care turned shelter into a living system. If wind entered, the child might be moved. If smoke gathered low, the covering might be shifted or the fire adjusted. If the ground felt damp, more material might be added beneath the bedding. If the child's face was exposed, the mother might turn the child toward her body or toward the warmer side of the space. Natural windbreaks could be as important as built ones. A group might stop on the lee side of a hill, near trees, beside rocks, or in a shallow depression where air moved less harshly. These choices mattered before any fire was made. A poor location could make every later task harder. More fuel would be needed. Coverings would lose warmth faster. Sleep would be lighter. The mother would spend more energy compensating for a place that never stopped taking heat away. A good location did not make winter easy, but it reduced the number of problems arriving at once. For children, that reduction was protection. It meant the mother's body heat lasted longer, the fire worked better, and the bedding had a better chance of staying dry. The real shelter, then, was not only the cave wall, the hide cover, or the windbreak. It was the careful combination of place, material, fire, and human attention. In that combined space, a mother could create a small room of survival inside a season that offered no room on its own. Choosing where to stop in an Ice Age winter was never only a question of comfort. For a mother with a child, the place itself could either help protection or quietly make every act of care harder. A dry place mattered first, because cold ground could steal warmth, even when the air seemed still. If a child slept on damp soil, frozen mud, melting snow, or thin bedding over stone, the body could lose heat from below, while the covering above still looked secure. A mother might hold the child close, add hides, place grasses or branches beneath the sleeping area, or move the child nearer to other bodies. But if the ground remained wet and cold, the night would keep working against her. This is why a good winter stop had to begin beneath the body as much as above it. The shelter could block wind, the fire could give heat, and the covering could trap warm air. But the child also needed a protected base. Dryness was a kind of hidden warmth. A place with less wind was just as important. Wind could turn a small opening into a serious problem. It could push smoke back into a shelter, carry sparks into bedding, strip heat from skin, and make a child's face, hands, or feet cool faster than the mother could easily correct. A mother might choose the inner side of a shelter, the lee side of a rock, or a position behind other adults. But the larger choice had already been made by the group. Where to stop before night, where to place the fire, where to arrange sleeping bodies, and where the child would be least exposed. In this way, the child's needs may have influenced decisions that looked like camp planning. A camp was not only a place for adults to rest. It was the environment in which children either stayed warm or slowly lost the warmth gathered during the day. Fuel also shaped the choice. Fire was powerful, but without fuel it was only a temporary answer. In some Ice Age landscapes, especially open steppe or tundra-like regions, good fuel might not be evenly available. Wood, brush, bone, dried dung, or other burnable material depended on the place and season. A group that stopped far from fuel had to spend more energy gathering it, and energy was already precious in winter. For a mother, fuel meant more than flame. It meant the possibility of drying a child's covering, warming food, keeping the sleeping space usable, and bringing heat back before dawn. A child's protection at night could begin with adults noticing fuel hours earlier. If no one gathered enough, the mother might have to rely more heavily on her own body heat and coverings. If fuel was available, the fire could support her care instead of leaving her to carry too much of the burden alone. Water was another careful need. Humans could not live without it, but in winter water could be difficult, frozen, distant, or costly to obtain. Snow and ice can provide water, but melting them requires heat and fuel. Streams might be dangerous, cold, or far from shelter. For a child, water connected to feeding, cooking, the mother's health, and the group's ability to stay in one place. A nursing mother needed hydration and food. Older children needed soft, manageable food and drink. A camp too far from water could demand extra travel. A camp too close to wet ground or flooding could create cold and dampness. Again, survival came from balance. The best place was not simply the warmest looking place or the driest looking place or the place closest to water. It had to hold several needs at once: shelter from wind, access to fuel, some way to obtain water, ground that could be insulated, space for fire and smoke, and enough safety for sleeping children. This kind of choice shows how deeply children belong to Ice Age survival. A mother protecting a child did not begin at the moment she wrapped the child for sleep. Protection began earlier, when the group judged the land. Is this place too exposed? Will the ground stay dry? Can smoke leave? Is there fuel for the night? Can water be reached without exhausting the mother or leaving the child too long? These questions may not have been spoken in modern terms, but the answers shaped whether warmth could be kept. In a cold season, a poor camp forced care to become constant repair. A better camp allowed care to become steadier. And for a small child, steadiness was often the difference between a night survived with quiet breathing and a night where winter kept finding its way in. A child could change the meaning of distance in an Ice Age winter. For a strong adult, a camp that was a little colder, a little farther from fuel, or a little more exposed to wind might still be manageable for one night. For a mother with a baby or young child, that same place could become a much heavier problem. The child could not simply endure the extra distance, the sharper wind, or the colder ground by will. So the group's decisions may have had to bend around the needs of the smallest members. This does not mean children controlled every movement, or that Ice Age groups always chose comfort over food, safety, or hunting opportunity. Survival required many compromises, but dependent children would have made some choices more costly. If the group stopped too late, there was less daylight to prepare bedding, gather fuel, dry coverings, and make a protected place for sleep. If the group chose a place too exposed, the mother would have to spend more energy shielding the child all night. If the group camped too far from water or fuel, adults might have to leave the shelter more often, and the mother's work could become harder. In this way, children may have quietly influenced where people paused, how long they stayed, and how carefully they arranged the inside of a shelter. A child's body made the group think not only about where adults could survive, but where children could keep enough warmth to survive. The sleeping place was especially important. Inside a cave, rock shelter, hide-covered frame, or natural windbreak, the child could not simply be placed anywhere. The coldest edge might be near the entrance. The smoky area might be too close to the fire. The ground might be damp in one corner and drier in another. A mother might need enough room to hold, feed, and adjust the child, while still staying close to warmth and other bodies. Older children might need to be placed where they could sleep safely without rolling toward the fire or drifting toward the cold edge of the bedding. These are small arrangements, but they show how shelter became more than a roof or wall. Shelter became a pattern of bodies. The strongest or most mobile adults could take less comfortable positions. The mother and child might need the warmer center, the drier bedding, or the place least touched by wind. Again, this is not something archaeology can prove in every case, but it follows from the real needs of children in cold conditions. If a child lost heat quickly, then the place where the child slept mattered more than almost any other place in the shelter. Movement during the day also changed when children were present. A group without small children could travel differently from a group carrying babies, watching toddlers, or helping tired older children through snow, frozen mud, or rough ground. A mother carrying a child moved with extra weight and less freedom in her arms. If she also carried food, tools, fuel, or coverings, the burden became greater. Someone else may have had to carry more material, slow the pace, or help the child during difficult stretches. Travel routes might be chosen not only for speed, but for shelter, wind protection, places to rest, and the possibility of stopping before night. This matters directly to the question of how mothers protected children, because protection did not begin after the group stopped moving. It began in the route itself. A path that exposed the child to wind for too long could undo the warmth carefully preserved under skins. A delay that pushed camp making into darkness could make sleep colder. A route without fuel could make the fire weaker. The child's need for warmth reached outward into the whole day. The mother's care therefore depended on decisions made by many people. She could hold the child close, but she could not make the landscape less exposed by herself. She could wrap the child, but she could not always gather enough fuel while carrying that child. She could watch the child's breathing, but she also needed others to help keep the camp workable. This is why Ice Age childcare should be seen as part of group survival. The child created a center of attention that was not loud, but powerful. Around that small body, people may have arranged fire, bedding, shelter, movement, food, and rest. A child who could not speak for its own survival still changed the questions the group had to answer. Can this place hold warmth through the night? Can the mother rest here? Can the child stay dry? Can the group move tomorrow without exhausting the people who carry the young? In the Ice Age, protecting children was not only the mother's arms closing around them, it was the entire group learning to make room for a fragile life inside a winter landscape that offered very little room at all. A mother's food was not separate from a child's warmth during Ice Age winters. It was one of the hidden sources of that warmth. When a mother ate, rested, and had enough strength to keep going, her body could carry, feed, warm, and watch the child more effectively. When she became hungry, cold, or exhausted, the child felt that weakness indirectly, sometimes before anyone else. This is especially important for a nursing baby. Milk does not appear outside the mother's condition. It depends on her body, her energy, her hydration, her recovery after birth, and the support around her. In a hard winter, when food could be scarce, travel could be difficult, and cold demanded more calories from everyone, feeding a mother was also a way of protecting the child. This does not mean Ice Age people understood nutrition in modern terms. They did not need to. They could see that a weak mother struggled more, that a hungry child cried, that warmth faded faster when bodies had no fuel, and that survival required food to move through the group toward the people who needed it most. For a child, food became heat in a very practical sense. The body uses energy to maintain temperature. A hungry child has less energy to spend on warmth, movement, growth, and recovery. A hungry baby depends even more strongly on the mother's body. A hungry older child may become tired, slow, quiet, or less able to walk through cold ground. In winter, this could create a dangerous circle. Cold increases the need for energy, but winter can also make food harder to find. If the child eats too little, the child becomes colder and weaker. If the mother eats too little, she has less strength to carry the child, less warmth to share, and possibly less ability to continue feeding a baby well. So when we ask how mothers protected children during Ice Age winters, we cannot speak only about hides, fire, and shelter. We also have to speak about meat, fat, gathered foods, stored foods where available, and the long work of obtaining enough calories before the body failed. Fat would have been especially valuable in cold environments because it provides dense energy. Animal foods could offer calories, protein, and fat when available, while plant foods, roots, seeds, berries, nuts, or other gathered resources depended heavily on region and season. Different Ice Age groups would have eaten different diets, based on landscape, climate, animals, plants, and knowledge passed through generations. We should not imagine one single Ice Age meal, but we can safely understand the central problem. Children needed regular energy, and mothers needed enough energy to protect them. A mother with a young child may have depended on others more during winter because her hands and movement were limited. If she was carrying a baby under a covering, she could not gather, butcher, haul fuel, or prepare materials as freely as someone unburdened. If she was nursing, she needed extra support. If she was recovering from birth, she may have been even more vulnerable. The group's sharing of food could therefore become part of childcare. A piece of fat, a portion of softened meat, a warm broth-like preparation if boiling or heating methods were available in that context, or a share of gathered food might not look like a dramatic rescue. But it could help keep the mother strong enough to keep the child warm through the night. Food also affected decisions about movement. A group might have to follow herds, return to known seasonal places, use stored knowledge of plants, or stay near resources that could sustain both adults and children. A mother's protection was tied to these wider choices. She could hold the child close, but if the group had no food, closeness alone was not enough. She could wrap the child in fur, but without calories, the child's body still had less fuel for heat. She could sit near the fire, but a starving body beside a fire remained fragile. This is the cold honesty of Ice Age winter. Warmth came from outside and inside at the same time. Fire warmed from the air. Hides slowed heat loss from the skin. Shelter blocked wind, but food gave the body something to burn within itself. For children, especially the youngest ones, the mother stood between those worlds. She received food from the group and turned it into milk, carrying strength, body heat, attention, and endurance. Her nourishment became part of the child's protection before the child could understand any of it. In that way, feeding the mother was not only feeding one adult, it was feeding the small circle of survival around her child. Hunger made the cold more dangerous because it weakened the body from the inside. A child in an Ice Age winter did not need food only to grow. The child needed food to stay warm, to stay awake enough to respond, to move when the group moved, and to recover after each cold night. When food was scarce, warmth became harder to keep. The body could not spend energy freely. A hungry child might stop playing, walk more slowly, cry more weakly, sleep too heavily, or become less able to shiver and recover from cold exposure. For a mother, these changes would matter because she was not only watching whether the child had eaten, she was watching whether the child still had enough strength to meet the winter. Hunger and cold can join together quietly. A child who is cold uses more energy. A child who uses more energy becomes hungry sooner. A child who cannot eat enough becomes colder again. This cycle could be especially dangerous during long winter nights, when movement slows and the fire may fade. A mother could wrap the child, hold the child, and bring the child near warmth. But food was still needed inside the body. Without it, every other protection had less to work with. Hunger also changed the mother's ability to care. A mother who had not eaten enough might still try to carry the child, stay awake, gather materials, nurse, prepare food, and watch the fire, but her body would have less reserve. She might become colder herself, and a colder mother had less warmth to share. She might move more slowly, recover less well after a hard day, or struggle to sleep enough while still responding to the child. If she was nursing, her own nutrition and hydration were part of the child's feeding system. In very difficult conditions, the whole group would have had to understand, through experience, that a mother's weakness could become a child's danger. This is why protecting children was not only a matter of giving food directly to children, it was also a matter of keeping caregivers strong. A hungry group becomes a colder group. People may sit closer, move less, speak less, and conserve energy. Decisions become harder. Should they travel to find food and risk exposing children to wind? Should they stay in a known shelter and risk running out? Should stronger adults leave to hunt or gather while mothers and children remain near the fire? Should food be shared toward the smallest child, the nursing mother, the injured adult, or the hunter who must travel tomorrow? We cannot know how every Ice Age group answered these questions. But the questions themselves are realistic because food, cold, and care were connected. In winter, every calorie had a direction. It could support movement, heat, milk, work, repair, or rest. For a mother and child, those directions overlapped. The mother needed energy so she could produce heat and remain alert. The child needed energy because a small body lost warmth quickly. If food was not enough, the burden on fire, clothing, and shelter increased. If the fire was weak too, the burden on the mother's body increased. If the mother was weak, the burden on the group increased. Survival was a chain. and hunger could pull on every link. Older children faced another problem. They might no longer be carried all the time, but they were not fully independent. They needed food that they could chew, digest, and hold down in cold conditions. Tough meat, frozen food, or hard plant foods may have required preparation before children could use them well. Fire helped soften some foods. Adults could cut, pound, warm, or share pieces in ways that made food more manageable. This food preparation was also protection. A child who could eat enough had more chance of staying warm through the next stretch of cold. A child who could not eat well, even if food existed, remained vulnerable. Mothers may have paid close attention to this, not in scientific language, but through repeated observation. Which child was too tired to chew? Which child needed smaller pieces? Which child grew quiet after a poor meal? Which child needed to be held near warmth after eating? Hunger also affected movement. A well-fed child might walk a short distance, respond to direction, and recover during rest. A hungry child might become slow, stumble, or need to be carried, increasing the mother's burden. A hungry mother carrying a tired child through wind would lose strength faster. This is why food was not a separate topic from winter childcare. It determined how far the group could move, how much weight the mother could bear, how safely children could sleep, and how well the body could answer cold. In the Ice Age, protecting a child meant keeping warmth from leaving the skin, but also keeping strength from leaving the body. Hunger was winter working from within. To protect a child during an Ice Age winter, the group also had to protect the mother from being used up too completely. This may sound simple, but it is one of the most important truths in the whole question. A baby's warmth often passed through the mother first. Her body carried the child, fed the child, shielded the child from wind, shared heat during sleep, and noticed changes before others could see them. But the mother was not an endless source of warmth. She was a living body under the same winter pressure as everyone else. If she became too hungry, too cold, too tired, or too isolated, the child's protection became weaker. A mother who could barely stand could not carry safely for long. A mother who slept too little could miss small signs of cold. A mother who had no dry covering for herself could not keep the child warm as well. A mother who did not eat enough might struggle to nurse, recover, or keep her own heat through the night. So the care of the child could not stop at the child's body. It had to widen until it included the person holding that body. In winter, this made support practical, not sentimental. Someone might share food with the mother, because the child depended on her strength. Someone might help carry fuel, hides, tools, or an older child so her arms were less burdened. Someone might tend the fire while she fed or slept. Someone might prepare bedding, repair a covering, soften food, or watch the child while she rested. We cannot prove each action in every Ice Age group, but the logic is grounded in human dependence. A mother caring for a small child has less freedom of movement, and in cold conditions that limitation matters. If she had to do everything alone, winter would press on her from too many directions at once. She would have to be shelter, food source, carrier, watcher, and worker without pause. No human body can do that forever. Exhaustion is dangerous because it arrives quietly. It does not always look like collapse. It can look like slower hands, duller attention, missed changes in the fire, a covering not dried in time, a child placed too close to smoke because there is no strength left to move again, or a mother falling into sleep so deeply that she cannot wake when the child grows cold. In a sleep audio story, this should not be told with fear, but with honesty. Winter did not only threaten through storms, it threatened through the gradual draining of the person who was caring for the child. That is why rest was also protection. A mother who could sleep even for a short while under safe conditions might wake with enough strength to continue. A mother who could eat before night might have more warmth to share. A mother who did not have to carry every burden could hold the child more steadily. The group that helped her was not only helping one adult, it was keeping the child's first shelter from breaking. This also changes how we understand strength in Ice Age life. Strength was not only the ability to hunt, walk far, or endure cold alone. Strength could also mean knowing when one person was carrying too much. It could mean arranging work so the mother and child did not become the weakest point in the group's winter. It could mean giving the warmer place to the nursing mother, sharing the last dry layer, waiting until she could travel, or slowing the pace because the child's survival depended on her body not failing. These choices may not have been perfect. Ice Age people lived with hard limits, and sometimes there may not have been enough food, fuel, or shelter for everyone. But when support was possible, it would have mattered deeply. A child was protected by the mother's arms, but the mother's arms were protected by the group's decisions. Her strength came from food, rest, warmth, and help. Her attention came from not being forced beyond the edge of exhaustion. Her ability to keep the child alive through winter depended on a circle larger than herself. In that circle, care moved in stages. The group supported the mother supported the child, and the child carried the future of the group. This is why protecting children during Ice Age winters was never only about the smallest body. It was also about preserving the tired body that kept the smallest body warm. In an Ice Age winter, staying alive did not always mean staying in one place. People often had to move, toward food, away from exposed wind, closer to fuel, nearer to water, or back to a known shelter. For adults, movement could bring warmth through effort. Walking, carrying, gathering, and working all produced body heat. But for babies and very young children, movement was different. They could not choose the path, judge the weather, or keep pace with the group. Many could not walk far at all. Some could not walk at all. So a mother's protection had to travel with the child. The child had to be carried, held, wrapped, or guided through a landscape where exposure could change quickly. This made baby carrying one of the most practical forms of winter care. A carried child could stay close to the mother's warmth. A covering could shield the child from wind. The mother could feel changes in the child's body more easily than if the child were separate. But carrying also created problems. It added weight. It limited the mother's hands. It could make balance more difficult on snow, ice, frozen mud, or uneven ground. It could trap too much heat and moisture under a wrap if the mother was walking hard. It could expose the child if the covering opened in wind. Protection during movement therefore required constant adjustment. The child had to be close enough to share warmth, but not so enclosed that breathing became difficult or moisture built up. The covering had to stay secure while the mother moved, but it also had to allow feeding, checking, and shifting. We do not have to claim one exact prehistoric baby carrier to understand this need. Organic materials such as hides, straps, cords, and plant fibers rarely survive well, but carrying infants is a basic human solution to infant dependence. In Ice Age winter, that solution would have become more demanding because the carried child was not only heavy, the child was vulnerable to wind, wetness, and cold stillness. A baby being carried may not produce much movement-generated warmth. The mother walks, the child rides. This means the child can be cold even while the mother is sweating. That difference mattered. If the mother wrapped both bodies too tightly, sweat could dampen inner layers. If she opened the covering too much, wind could take heat from the child. If she carried the child outside her main layer, the child might be more exposed. If she carried the child inside, she had to manage heat, moisture, breathing, and access. These are the kinds of small technical problems that mothers may have solved through habit, touch, and inherited knowledge rather than formal instruction. Older children created another set of challenges. A child old enough to walk might still tire quickly in snow or cold wind. Short legs sink differently. Small feet chill faster. A child who falls behind may become exposed at the edge of the group. A mother or another adult might have to hold a hand, carry the child for part of the route, stop more often, or choose a path with more shelter. The group's pace could not be based only on the strongest walkers. In winter, a slow child was not simply an inconvenience. A slow child could become a cold child. That cold child might then need to be carried, slowing the group further. So movement had to be planned with children in mind before trouble began. A good route for a mother and child was not always the shortest. It might be the route with less wind, more places to rest, easier footing, closer fuel, or a known shelter at the end. Carrying also affected what the mother could bring. If her arms or back were occupied by a child, someone else might need to carry extra hides, food, tools, or fuel. This again shows that protecting a child during Ice Age winters was not only a mother's private task. Her body carried the child, but the group may have had to carry more of the world around them. Every dry covering, every piece of food, every tool for cutting or scraping, every ember preserved for the next fire, and every bundle of fuel became part of the child's mobile shelter. Movement turned care into a moving circle. The mother's warmth was at the center. Around it were wraps, straps, coverings, other adults, chosen paths, resting places, and the decision not to leave the smallest body behind the pace of winter. In that sense, carrying a child through the cold was not merely transportation. It was a way of keeping life attached to warmth, while the whole group crossed a landscape that could not be trusted to protect anyone. When a group moved through an Ice Age winter with children, the safest path was not always the fastest path. Speed belongs to strong adults with free hands, enough food, and bodies able to warm themselves through movement. A mother carrying a baby or guiding a tired child had different needs. The path had to protect warmth as much as it shortened distance. A direct route across open ground might save time, but if wind struck the child for too long, that saved time could be lost in cooling, stopping, rewrapping, feeding, or carrying a child who had grown weak. A longer route behind a ridge, through lower ground, near trees, or between sheltered places might be safer because it allowed warmth to stay with the child. This is one of the quiet ways children may have shaped Ice Age movement. They made exposure expensive. Adults could decide to push through discomfort. Children could not always recover from that discomfort quickly. So a group with small children may have had to think in intervals. How far before the next rest? How long before the child must be warmed again? Where the mother can sit, where fuel might be found, where the wind drops, where the ground is dry enough to stop. We cannot reconstruct every route, but the logic is direct. A child's body turns distance into a question of heat. Careful path choice also mattered, because movement changes the balance between warmth and moisture. A walking adult may sweat under heavy coverings, even in cold air. A carried baby may remain still under those same coverings. The mother's body is producing heat through effort. The child may be depending on trapped warmth. If the covering is too closed, moisture can build. If it is too open, wind can enter. If the group stops suddenly, the mother's sweat can cool, and the child's protection may need to be adjusted quickly. A route with places to pause safely allowed adults to manage this. They could open or close wraps, check the child's hands and face, feed or soothe, shake snow from a hide, or change who carried extra weight. In open wind, even a short pause could be difficult. In a sheltered hollow or behind stone, a pause could become useful care. This is why rest stops were part of protection, not a failure of strength. For a child, regular pauses could prevent cold from becoming deep. For the mother, they could prevent exhaustion from reaching the point where attention weakened. Footing was another concern. Ice, snow, frozen mud, stones, and uneven ground all make carrying more dangerous. A fall while holding a baby could injure both mother and child. A young child walking alone could slip, wet clothing, lose a foot covering, or fall behind. A safer path might avoid steep slopes or exposed ice, even if it took longer. The group may have arranged itself so children and mothers were not left at the edges. Someone might walk near them, help them over difficult places, carry bundles, or take turns guiding older children. These are cautious possibilities, but they fit the reality of dependent children in difficult terrain. The mother's protection during movement depended on the bodies around her as much as on the covering around the child. Fuel and water also influenced routes. A path that led to a known shelter but passed through a place without fuel could become dangerous by night. A path with fuel but poor shelter could make sleeping cold. A path near water could help the group, but wet ground and icy edges could threaten children. Movement was therefore a chain of trade-offs. The mother could not protect the child only at the final camp. She had to protect the child during every part of the crossing. The group had to ask, in practical ways, whether the route gave enough chances to preserve warmth. In winter, the best route might be the one that allowed care to continue. The child could be checked, fed, warmed, dried, and carried without exposing the mother beyond her strength. This slower, more careful movement may look inefficient if we imagine only adult speed, but for a group carrying children through cold, efficiency meant arriving with the fragile people still warm enough to recover. A route that exhausted the mother or chilled the child was not truly efficient, even if it was short. The Ice Age did not reward speed alone. It rewarded timing, shelter, fuel, food, and the ability to keep the smallest bodies from falling outside the group's protection. So when mothers moved with children through winter, every step carried more than weight. It carried a decision about how much cold the child could meet, and how much cold the group would refuse to let through. A child could slow a group without ever meaning to. In an Ice Age winter, this slowing was not simply a problem of pace. It was a problem of survival rhythm. Adults might have wanted to travel farther before dark, reach a better hunting place, follow animal tracks, or return to a known shelter before weather changed. But a baby who needed feeding, a young child whose feet were cold, or an older child who had become too tired to walk could change the day's plan. The group might have to stop earlier, move in shorter stretches, wait while coverings were adjusted, or divide burdens so the mother did not become exhausted. This does not mean every movement revolved only around children. Ice Age groups had to balance many needs at once: food, safety, fuel, water, weather, and the strength of adults. But children made one truth unavoidable. A group could not call a journey successful if the smallest members arrived too cold, too hungry, or too weak to recover. A child's body forced time to become more careful. The day could no longer be measured only by distance. It also had to be measured by warmth preserved, energy saved, and the mother's strength remaining at night. This is why a child may have changed when the group stopped. Stopping too early could mean missing food or shelter. Stopping too late could mean trying to make camp in darkness, with tired hands, low fuel, and a child already chilled from the day. For a mother, late stopping could be especially hard. She might need to feed the child, dry or replace a covering, warm small hands and feet, arrange bedding, and recover her own body before the coldest hours arrived. If all of that began too late, winter gained an advantage. So the group may have learned that the needs of children had to be anticipated, not answered only after distress appeared. A child crying from cold was not the beginning of the problem. It was a signal that the problem had already started. A child too quiet after walking might mean fatigue had gone too far. A mother slowing under the burden of carrying might mean the night's protection was already being weakened. In this way, children could change the rhythm of travel by requiring earlier decisions. They made the group ask, should we rest now, before the child is too cold? Should someone else carry the extra hide? Should we choose the sheltered route, even if it takes longer? Should we stop where there is enough fuel, even if the next place might be better for adults? These questions were not signs of weakness. They were signs of a group thinking beyond the strongest bodies. Sharing strength was part of that rhythm. A mother carrying a baby might need another person to carry tools, food, fuel, or bedding. An older child might need a hand from a sibling or adult on rough ground. Someone might walk on the windward side, helping shield the mother and child. Someone might go ahead to prepare fire or check a shelter. Someone might stay behind with slower walkers. These possibilities should be stated carefully, because we cannot prove every arrangement. But they fit the practical reality of human group life. Dependent children make cooperation useful, and winter makes it more urgent. A child could also change the emotional rhythm of the group, not in a dramatic way, but in the quiet attention people gave to small signs. A child stumbling, coughing in cold air, refusing food, or becoming silent would matter. A mother's concern could signal to others that the pace needed to change. The group's survival depended not only on strong decisions, but on listening to vulnerable bodies in a harsh environment. Ignoring weakness could be costly. Protecting weakness, when possible, allowed the group to continue into the future. The child who slowed the journey today might one day learn the paths, gather fuel, care for another child, remember where winter shelters stood, or carry knowledge after elders were gone. So the slower rhythm created by children was not only a burden, it was an investment in continuity. Ice Age winter may have favoured speed in some moments, but it also favoured groups that knew when to slow down. A mother protecting a child during movement was not only keeping one small body warm, she was helping set the pace at which human life could pass through cold without leaving its most fragile members behind. A mother protecting a child during an Ice Age winter was central, but she was not meant to be the entire world alone. Human children are dependent for a long time, and that long dependence is difficult for one body to carry without help, especially in cold seasons. A mother could warm, feed, hold, and notice the child in ways no tool could replace, but other people could extend her strength. A grandmother, an older sibling, a father, an aunt, an uncle, or another adult in the group could help keep the child alive by doing work that surrounded the mother's care. They might gather fuel, repair a covering, prepare food, keep a fire steady, carry materials, watch an older child, or sit near the mother and baby so shared warmth lasted longer. We should be cautious about describing exact family roles across all Ice Age societies. The Paleolithic world lasted a very long time and included many kinds of groups in many environments. But the broader idea is well supported by human social life. Children are easier to protect when care is shared. In winter, shared care could be the difference between one exhausted mother and a small network of people keeping the child within reach of warmth. Older children may have been especially important in ordinary ways. They could not replace adults, but they could watch a younger sibling for a moment, bring small pieces of fuel, help carry light items, warn when a child moved too close to fire, or stay near a younger child while adults worked. These actions would not leave strong archaeological traces. A child helping another child does not become a fossil, but in a cold camp, small help mattered. If a mother could sleep for a short time because someone else watched the fire or noticed the child, her own strength was preserved. If an older sibling kept a younger child from wandering toward wind or sparks, danger was reduced. If another adult carried bedding so the mother could carry the baby more safely, the child's protection improved before anyone reached the shelter. Grandmothers and older adults may also have held valuable knowledge. In harsh environments, memory is a survival tool. Older people may have remembered which places stayed dry, which winds came from which direction, which animal skins worked best in cold, how to soften or repair coverings, where fuel could be found, when to leave a place, and how to recognize a child becoming dangerously chilled. Again, we should not invent a perfect picture where every older person was present or every group had the same structure. But it is reasonable to understand that knowledge, especially repeated winter knowledge, could help mothers protect children. A young mother did not have to learn every danger alone if others carried memory with them. Shared care also reduced the risk of attention failing. A mother might be feeding one child while another child moved toward the cold edge of the shelter. She might be drying a covering while the fire changed. She might be too tired to notice smoke lowering near the bedding. Another person nearby could notice what she missed. This kind of protection is not dramatic, but it is deeply human. It creates a wider circle of observation around the child. The child's body remained small and vulnerable, but the number of eyes, hands, and memories around that body increased. This is why the idea of the lone mother against winter is incomplete. Her closeness mattered most, but closeness needed support. A child could be warmed by the mother's body while being protected by someone else's labor. The fire could be tended by one person, the food prepared by another, the shelter repaired by another, the child held by the mother, and an older child watched by a sibling. In that arrangement, care moved through the group like shared heat. The mother was not less important because others helped. She was more protected, and therefore the child was more protected. Ice Age winters would have tested every weak point in the group. A mother alone with a child would become one of those weak points if no one supported her. But a mother surrounded by shared work became a stronger shelter. Her arms could hold the child because other hands helped hold the conditions around her. This may be one of the oldest lessons hidden in the question of childhood survival. Children lived not only because mothers cared, but because human groups learned to care around mothers. In an Ice Age winter, sharing was not only kindness, it was a way of moving survival from one body to another. When people shared fire, food, dry coverings, bedding materials, or labor, they were not simply making life more comfortable. They were giving the weakest members of the group a better chance to remain warm, fed, and protected. For a child, this mattered because children could not collect most of what they needed. A baby could not gather fuel. A young child could not prepare a hide. A tired child could not make a dry sleeping place. A mother carrying or nursing a child might not have enough freedom to do all of this alone. So the group's shared resources became part of the child's protection. A piece of dry hide passed toward a mother and baby could reduce heat loss. A warmer place near the fire could keep a child from cooling through the night. A portion of food given to a nursing mother could support the child indirectly. A bundle of fuel added before dawn could keep the sleeping space from losing warmth. These acts may have looked ordinary in daily life, but in winter they carried the weight of survival. Fire was especially shareable because one hearth could protect more than one person. A single flame could warm a group, dry several coverings, soften food for children, give light to repair tools, and create a center where people could sleep closer together. If each person had to protect warmth alone, children would suffer first. Around a shared fire, warmth became something gathered. The mother did not have to create all heat with her own body. The child did not depend only on one hide. The group could arrange itself so heat moved through the camp, from coals into air, from air into coverings, from coverings into bodies, from bodies into the smallest child. Sharing fire also meant sharing responsibility. Someone had to feed it. Someone had to watch it. Someone had to make sure smoke did not gather too low. Someone had to protect bedding from sparks. When this work was shared, the mother could rest, feed, or hold the child without carrying the entire night alone. Food sharing worked in a similar way. In cold conditions, food was warmth before it was anything else. It gave the body fuel to make heat, heal, move, and stay alert. A child's need for food was direct, but a mother's need was also part of the child's survival. If food reached only the strongest adults, the group might move today but weaken its future. If some food reached mothers, children, the old, or the injured, the group preserved more than muscle. It preserved continuity. This does not mean food sharing was always easy or generous. Scarcity makes every choice difficult. Ice Age people lived with hard limits, and we should not romanticize them as perfectly selfless. But shared food, when possible, would have had practical value. A fed mother could nurse, carry, and stay warmer. A fed child could sleep, walk, recover, and resist cold better. A fed older sibling could help rather than become another urgent burden. Material sharing mattered too. Hides, fur, sinew, cords, grasses, branches, and bedding all required effort to obtain and prepare. A mother protecting a child might need the driest layer, the softer bedding, or an extra tie to keep a covering closed. Someone else giving up or helping make those materials was sharing protection. A repaired seam could stop wind from reaching a child's chest. A dry grass layer under bedding could stop ground cold from draining warmth. A cord or strap could keep a baby close to the mother's body during movement. These are small objects, but winter gives small objects large meaning. The group's care became visible in where the best dry layer went, who slept in the warmest center, who carried extra weight, and who was allowed to rest. Sharing also carried knowledge. A person who knew how to dry a hide without stiffening it, how to place bedding away from damp ground, how to keep embers alive, or how to recognize weather changes was sharing more than labor. They were sharing experience. For a child, That experience could become protection without the child ever knowing it. This is the quiet reality of Ice Age childcare. Mothers protected children directly, but the materials of protection often came through many hands. Warmth was not owned by one person. It was built, guarded, divided, and passed along. And when it reached a child, it carried the work of the group inside it. A child surviving an Ice Age winter was rarely the achievement of one person alone. The mother may have been the closest protector, the warmest body, the first listener, and the one most tied to the child's hunger, sleep, and fear. But around her stood a wider pattern of care. The child survived inside that pattern. It may have included relatives, older children, skilled adults, elders with memory, and people whose work did not look like childcare from a distance but still protected the child. The person who kept embers alive was helping the child. The person who scraped a hide was helping the child. The person who carried fuel, shared food, repaired a shelter edge, watched smoke, or slowed the group's pace was helping the child. This is why Ice Age childhood should not be imagined only as a private scene between mother and baby. It was also a social arrangement. The child's weakness made the group's cooperation more visible. A baby could not survive by courage. A toddler could not survive by skill. A young child could not survive because it understood the weather. Children survived because care was distributed around them. Some care came through touch. Some came through food. Some came through memory. Some came through tools. Some came through the decision not to move too fast, not to leave the mother unsupported, not to let the fire die before morning. This does not mean Ice Age groups were gentle in every moment. They lived with real scarcity, risk, and loss. We should not turn them into a perfect image of harmony, but the long dependence of human children gives us a truthful clue about human life. A species with children who need years of protection cannot be built only on individual strength. It must also depend on attention, sharing, teaching, and patience. Winter made that dependence stronger. In a warm season, a child's needs could still be heavy. In an Ice Age winter, those needs became sharper and more expensive. A child needed warmth, while adults needed warmth too. A child needed food, while food might be difficult to find. A child needed rest, while the group might need to move. So every protected child represented a chain of choices. Someone gave time, someone gave calories, someone gave warmth, someone gave knowledge, someone gave space near the fire. Someone gave the mother enough support that her body did not fail before the child's body could recover. This network of care may have shaped what it meant to be human, not in a grand, sudden way, but in repeated winter habits. People learned to notice the vulnerable. They learned that a small body could change the plan. They learned that the future of the group was carried in people who could not yet contribute much work. A child did not hunt, build, or remember migration routes as an infant, but if protected long enough, that child could one day learn the landscape, help prepare materials, care for younger children, and carry the group's memory forward. The Ice Age forced people to make room for this delayed return. They had to spend strength on someone who would only become strong later. That is a deep form of social intelligence. It is not sentimental. It is practical and human at the same time. When mothers protected children, they were not only saving one night of breathing, they were holding open the possibility of later knowledge, later hands, later voices, later care. And when the group protected the mother, it was protecting that possibility too. The child's survival belonged to everyone, because the child's future could one day belong to everyone. This is why the answer to the title cannot be reduced to one object. Mothers protected their children with warmth, coverings, food, fire, shelter, carrying, and watchfulness. But beneath all of those was a wider truth. They protected children inside a human circle. The circle may have been small, tired, hungry, and imperfect. It may have been pressed by wind, darkness, and scarcity. Yet when it worked, it kept the child from facing winter alone. And perhaps that was one of the oldest forms of protection humans ever made. Not a wall of stone, but a circle of bodies, labour, memory, and care around the smallest life in the cold. By the time we reach the end of this question, the answer no longer looks like one simple method. Mothers did not protect their children during Ice Age winters with only fire, only fur, only shelter, or only their arms. They protected them through a whole arrangement of life built around a fragile body. A child had to be kept warm from the outside and fueled from the inside. The child had to be dry, fed, carried, watched, rested, and placed where wind, smoke, ground cold, and hunger could not all reach at once. The mother's body stood at the center of this protection, but it was never the whole answer by itself. Her warmth mattered, her milk or feeding care mattered, her attention mattered. Her ability to read a child's skin, breath, crying, stillness, and sleep mattered. Yet her strength depended on food, rest, fire, shelter, materials, and other people. The protection of the child was therefore not a single act of motherhood. It was a system of survival. This is why childcare should not be treated as a small detail in Ice Age history. It may have been one of the pressures that shaped the daily choices of human groups. Where should the camp be placed? How much fuel is enough for the night? Which covering must stay dry? Who carries the child? Who carries the bedding? When should the group stop moving? Who needs the warmer sleeping place? How close should the child be to the fire? How can smoke leave without letting too much cold in? These questions are not separate from Ice Age life. They are Ice Age life seen from the point where the group was most vulnerable. A child made survival more complicated, because a child could not simply be told to endure. A baby could not wait for a better season. A young child could not produce more heat by understanding danger. The group had to create conditions where that weakness did not become fatal. In doing so, they were not only protecting children, they were shaping habits of cooperation, planning, material skill, and patience. This does not mean we should exaggerate or pretend that Ice Age childhood was easy or always protected successfully. Many children in prehistoric times would have faced high risks from cold, illness, injury, hunger, and other dangers. The honest story includes vulnerability and loss, but the fact that human populations endured cold environments at all tells us that enough children survived for generations to continue. That survival required care that worked often enough, through winters harsh enough, to carry human life forward. Mothers were central to that care because children needed close warmth, feeding, touch, and attention. But the wider group made that care more possible. The hunter who brought back fat, the person who repaired a hide, the elder who remembered a sheltered place, the sibling who watched a younger child, and the adult who kept embers alive before dawn all belong to the child's protection. When we see it this way, the strongest figure in the Ice Age story is not always the person holding a weapon. Sometimes it is the person holding a child through the long cold. Sometimes it is the person who makes sure the holder of that child has food. Sometimes it is the person who notices that the fire is fading while everyone else sleeps. Survival was built from these quiet acts, as much as from the dramatic ones. The child, because it was small and dependent, revealed the true structure of human life. No one survives alone for long, and children make that truth impossible to ignore. The Ice Age did not only test human bodies, it tested whether humans could organize warmth, labor, food, and attention around those who needed them most. A mother protecting a child was not outside history. She was near its center. Her work may rarely appear in the tools we find, but without that work, the future would not have had enough living children to inherit the tools, the roots, the stories, and the memory of winter. If there is an educational message hidden inside this Ice Age question, it is this: human survival was never built only on strength. Tools mattered, hunting mattered, fire mattered, clothing, shelters, movement, memory, and knowledge of the land all mattered. But none of these things would have carried human life forward if the weakest members of the group had been left outside the circle of care. A child in winter could not earn protection by usefulness. A baby could not bring meat, gather fuel, repair a hide, or remember the safe path to a shelter. Yet the group still had to protect that child if there was to be a next generation. This tells us something simple and profound about human beings. Civilization did not begin only when people made sharper tools or stronger shelters. It also began in the repeated decision to keep vulnerable life alive long enough to become part of the future. During Ice Age winters, a mother protecting a child was doing more than solving one night of cold. She was protecting time itself. She was protecting a life that might later learn language, carry memory, make tools, care for another child, and remember how winter was survived. The child's weakness asked adults to think beyond the present hour. It asked them to spend energy on someone who could not yet repay it. That is not weakness in the group. That is one of the deepest forms of human strength. The lesson is not that Ice Age people were perfect, gentle, or safe from loss. They were not. Their world could be harsh, and many things were beyond control. Food could disappear, weather could turn, illness could come without explanation. A child could be loved and still be at risk. Honesty requires us to keep that truth, but honesty also allows us to see the other side. Again and again, enough children survived because adults learned how to protect them. They learned how to use fire without letting it harm the child. They learned how to keep coverings dry. They learned how to place a sleeping body away from frozen ground. They learned how to slow a journey, share food, keep a mother strong, and gather round a small life that could not survive alone. These are not small achievements. They are the quiet foundations of human continuity. In many ways, the Ice Age reminds us that care is a technology too. It may not look like a tool because it is made from attention, timing, touch, and shared labor, but it solves real problems. It keeps warmth from leaving. It notices danger early. It organizes people around need. It passes knowledge from one generation to the next. A mother's care in winter was not separate from science, even if she did not use modern scientific words. She observed cause and effect. Wet coverings made children colder. Wind took warmth. Food gave strength. Fire helped, but smoke harmed. A tired caregiver missed things. A child slept better when held close and kept dry. These observations, repeated over many winters, became practical knowledge. That knowledge may not have been written down, but it was taught through hands, habits, and memory. This is why the story has value now. It does not ask us to romanticize the past. It asks us to respect the intelligence inside ordinary care. When someone protects a child, feeds the tired, warms the cold, or makes room for the vulnerable, that person is taking part in a very old human pattern. The Ice Age shows this pattern clearly because the stakes were so visible. Cold did not reward pride. It rewarded cooperation, preparation, and patience. It rewarded groups that understood that the smallest body could not be treated as an afterthought. Mothers protected children with their arms, but also with the help of every skill humans had gathered. Fire, clothing, shelter, food, memory, and social care. And perhaps that is the lasting message. The measure of human survival is not only how far the strongest could walk into the cold, but how carefully they brought the weakest with them. When we return to the child at the center of this winter, the story becomes quieter. The snow is no longer only a background. The fire is no longer only a tool. The hide is no longer only a covering. The mother's body is no longer only a body. Each one becomes part of a fragile arrangement made to protect a life that could not protect itself. A child survived Ice Age winter through many layers at once. The warmth of skin, the dryness of fur, the steadiness of fire, the shelter of stone or hide, the strength of food, the memory of elders, the slower pace of the group, and the mother's repeated attention through cold nights. None of these answers is complete alone. A fire without food could not save a starving child. A fur without dryness could become heavy and cold. A shelter without watchfulness could fill with smoke or lose warmth before dawn. A mother without support could become too exhausted to keep protecting. The real answer is not one invention, but a circle. Mothers protected children by keeping them inside that circle for one more hour, one more night, one more crossing, one more winter. Much of that circle has vanished from the ground. We may find tools, hearths, needles, bones, and traces of shelters, but we do not find every hand that warmed a child. We do not find every mother who woke in darkness. We do not find every older sibling who stayed close, every elder who remembered a better stopping place, every shared piece of food, every dry layer saved for the smallest body. History often preserves the hard things better than the soft things. But human life has always depended on soft things too. Touch, patience, attention, and the willingness to spend strength on someone who cannot yet return it. That may be the deepest truth of this question. Ice Age mothers did not defeat winter. No one defeated winter. They learned how to delay its reach. They learned how to place warmth between the cold and the child. They learned how to make weakness survivable. Not perfectly, not always, but often enough for human generations to continue. Every person alive today exists because, somewhere in the long past, small children were kept alive through seasons they could not understand. Some were held close. Some were fed when food was scarce. Some were carried when the path was too long. Some were placed near a fire that someone guarded through the night. Some slept inside coverings, repaired by hands we will never know. The lesson is not that the past was gentle. It was not. The lesson is that, even in a harsh world, care became a form of intelligence. It solved problems that strength alone could not solve. It made survival wider than the strongest adult body. It allowed the weakest life in the group to become part of the future. So when we imagine an Ice Age mother holding her child through a long winter night, we should not see only sadness or fear. We should see knowledge. We should see a human being reading the cold through the child's skin, reading the fire through its fading light, reading the group through its shared labor, and reading the future through one small breath that had to continue. That breath was not guaranteed. It had to be protected again and again. Perhaps this is why the story still matters. It reminds us that humanity was shaped not only by danger, but by the response to danger, not only by hunger, but by sharing, not only by cold, but by warmth deliberately kept. And when the last embers of the night glowed under ash, and a mother listened to see whether her child was still breathing softly beside her, what part of human history was being protected there, before anyone had a word for history at all?